In Varennes, about 7 years ago, there was a massive attack. There was a invasion from another plane that no one was ready for and no one had seen. It caused a lot of problems and then suddenly stopped after a whole lot of reasons that nobody knew. A lot of destruction happened in Calavier. A lot of people got displaced from their homes because of this massive fortress that fell out of the sky. Cut to only about a year ago, or a little less than, a band of heroes, some of them refugees, some of them local town folk, saw that the world needed to be better and took it upon themselves to be heroes, to try to make the world a better place. They may have started off as protectors of the city, or as minstrels, or as even holy people, but they found each other as friends. And in so doing, they set themselves on a path and a course that they weren't ready for, that took them to places they never expected in their wildest lives to be, like to hell. They made it all the way down to Thave, where very few people from Navarre ever appear and survive to get out of. But they did so, in so doing toppling an entire Blood Witch regime and establishing a new one in the process. They also found themselves being called on as heroes from other people within the world. Callie and Varro especially contacted them and let them know that there was need for new aid. There was new threats that were happening that hadn't been there before. Dragons had been coming up from the ground, from underneath, and had been rising and awakening themselves after centuries of being dormant to ravage towns and to terrify and entrap people. So these heroes were called on to be a part of stopping that process, to save the people of Varennes, of Calavier. And the group of adventurers that are now together were banded in this last adventure trying to defeat one of these dragons. It was Lord Ansgar of Greyhall. It was Golly Redbeard, Galen, Zaldor, the Wizard of the Seventh Tower, Jericho, and Hemlock are all working together on a magical flying airship that they happened to get teleported into to defeat Balrog, the dragon. After so doing, they found a couple of different ways of doing so, getting some magical runes, as well as acquiring some really interesting knowledge from other planar creature, who told them that the events that transpired 7 years ago, they were intertwined with. And the person that caused all of that havoc and destruction was named Sher Mordrin. Sher Mordrin flew down in an iron fortress, and now they are inexplicably linked to him. And if he is ever going to be defeated or destroyed, they are the ones that are going to have to do it. And if they choose not to, then all of Varennes is likely going to perish. That's a hard task to walk away from, so they decided to take that on and to go seek out where Sher Mordrin was. They did so by going into the Iron Fortress, that giant ship that descended out of the other planes. And it was now rusted and decaying and dangerous. And it was covered in scavengers who were doing their best to make a living off of the ancient relics and bizarre magics that were a part of this thing. But they, working with one of the scavengers, were able to explore the ship itself and to find out if Sher Mordrin was there, why, and where he might be next. Golly did make some connections with a Chaloran device earlier called the Source. The Source gave him all sorts of powers that also allowed him to translate and understand some things that were happening on this ship. And one of the last things he did before we left was to discern exactly what Sher Mordrin's task was. In the archive logs, we found that there was an entire process and reason that Sher Mordrin was here. He was looking for a place called the Quiet Room. And the only way he could acquire the Quiet Room is by ringing what was referred to as a crystal bell. And he was able to find the crystal bell, acquire the Quiet Room, and then abandoned everything else. He left the Iron Fortress behind. He left all of the systems and all the people that came with him behind. The entire Legion army that was with him was left to their own devices because he was gone. And that was where we found out we should find him next. Perhaps down in Zexa, which is where one of the clues indicated he located the crystal bell. we might be able to find information to get to that quiet room if we could obtain it. We decided to leave the Iron Fortress, and almost as gently as we came in. However, Golly still had some power and still activated a couple of switches because the whole place was powered up, and decided to power down its defenses. And there was one other panel that allowed us to activate, I believe they were called the Skull Jets, to engage them. And Golly opted to not select the Skull Jets. Hemlock opted to fire at the console and activated them anyway. It created an escape route for the Iron Fortress to literally go back into the void plane from which it came and take anyone else that was on the ship with it. That was all of us. In a comedy of errors, we tried to bumble and rustle and run our way into the wake, which was docked and parked on top of the Iron Fortress, and barely, by the most amazing roll of Hemlock's piloting, got away and escaped out of it. But the ship was damaged in the process, almost severely damaged. So we needed to find a place to get it repaired. And there were no people in Canterbury where we were at that could do magical ship repairs. No one's seen an airship like this before. The best ideas that we came up with were coming from Lord Ansgar, who mentioned that in Shadow Hall, there were dwarven craftsmen there who did work with magical items and did just amazing magical crafting within the world, and perhaps they could probably repair the ship. We decided to have a couple of conversations about it and figure out what our next plan was, if we were going to Zexa or if we really needed to repair the ship. We'd opted to repair the ship first, at which point Jericho was able to get reunited with an old friend of his, and as they got reacquainted, the rest of us got ready for the next day. And the following morning, we all traveled on the ship, Jericho abandoning the person he just reconnected with. We were on our way to Shadow Hall, which was a bit of a long flight because it's to the north of Rennes, over Calvier, when we were attacked by a set of dragons. And I mean set because it was not a singular dragon. There was a brine dragon and another brine dragon, but also storm dragons. There were multiple types of dragons together that were attacking us out of the air, calling us pact breakers, and barely left us alive, intended to kill all of us. Zelda even was thrown off of the ship and magnetically was able to be brought back because of a potion that he drank earlier. That potion, by the way, happened when he encountered another Wizard of Selection, Millstark of the Seventh Tower, who he had to convince, I said Seventh Tower, Second Tower, Millstark of the Second Tower, who Zelda had to convince was, as a Wizard of Selection, not really understanding everything that we were observing, and recognizing that being a wizard in the world is more effective to create change, to create positivity. Anyway, we barely survived the dragons, but we did. The ship was even more damaged now because of the massive beating that we had taken. So, still barely able to fly, the wake limps itself up to Shadow Hall, where we are welcomed, first hesitantly and then graciously, as Lord Ansgar announces himself, proves himself to be a Lord of Grey Hall, and is welcomed in by Mason Lord Holgrim, and the rest of us are also brought in as part of his crew. Golly, however, splinters off, because now that we're in Shadow Hall, he makes note of the fact that he has some unfinished business that he needs to take care of. And he goes off looking for a young woman named Marisha and another woman named Dana. He went off looking for them while the rest of us tried to learn of what happened with the war, how things have been. We've learned that some magic that was feeding into the Great War of the Undead up in Rescalon was petered off a bit, and they were able to make some ground in the forces. It was suspected from Millstark that because the Iron Fortress was gone, any magic that was flowing through it from Zexa was reduced or eliminated at that point. So possibly strengthening the non-undead side and helping them out in the process. We continued to look on for waiting for the ship to be repaired, which we found out it can't be. As incredible as the craftsmen were, they were not shipwrights, and they suggested going to an actual ship repair location to possibly get the fixes that we need to have done. So now we have to continue to repair the ship, but Galen remembered that Shadowhall was the location of the Vedanites that we had been told about so long ago, which might be a helpful tool in defeating Sher Mordrim. So we ask about that and look it up. And there was an old miner named Miner Thalmar who'd been around for a really, really long time and had some ancient information, had some artifacts of relics of possible information of where Vedanite could be. Certainly nowhere in Shadowhall, but much, much, much deeper below Shadowhall, past the Great Gates and across an ocean, an actual sea of where there used to be water. At the end of the waterfall, there's supposed to be a vault. And if we could get access into the vault, the Vedanite might be in there. It seemed like a long stretch, but with the wake unable to be repaired and never probably getting a chance to be this close again, we decided to take it. So the next morning, we're getting ready to head down further than almost anyone's ever been in Shadowhall for a very, very long time to go on this quest across an underground sea. But before we do, Golly has to make his goodbyes, has to talk with Marisha, who it turns out he did find, but she was engaged to another dwarf. Someone else who, because she had given up on Golly, assuming him dead, had found a way to move on. When Golly was trying to find a way to reconnect with her or to at least let that go, Dana, Golly's wife, which we found out, who we had thought to be dead, returns suddenly and reconnects with Golly in the most graphically passionate way possible that could be described. And he now has an entire another set of problems to deal with. So he happily leaves those problems behind, joins the adventurers, and we all head south to go into this underground sea. There are mine carts and abandoned mines and tracks for miles and miles and miles. We expect this to be a 5-day journey in general, but there is not the water. We actually don't find that ocean or that sea. What we do find, we were warned about, is undead. We find massive and massive amounts of undead, up to the thousands of them that are just roaming around trudging. And most of them didn't bother with us, didn't look at us, and didn't look for us until we encountered a fallen Lord of Dakareth, a ancient, terrifying creature of the undead who was ridiculously, legendarily powerful and nearly one-shotted all of us in one go. Thankfully, we were able to jump into a mining cart and race away from it as fast as possible on our ways towards this waterfall if we could ever find it. We did survive and made it to the vaults. It was an amazingly elaborate, very, very well constructed metal vault at the base of which is now this dried up waterfall, just like we were told. Because of some knowledge that Hemlock had remembered, he was able to set the dials to 44, 96, and 1. Information that was provided to him, not in his previous life, but in the current life from Cord, that messenger from the other plane, who provided the key and opened up entry to the doors. Once we got inside the vault, we encountered a gigantic golden automaton, a huge living metal person who called itself Vessel. Vessel indicated that we were not the makers, could tell that we were not Chaloran, which is what this vault was and what the make of Vessel was. So extremely old, thousands of years old at this point. But understanding that we were facing a similar threat, that we were trying to fight Lord Rykal, of who that undead battle is happening with, and maybe Shormorgen after, Vessel decided to help and aid us to get to the Vedanites. So we followed Vessel through a bunch of different traps. Several of them Vessel took care of. Several of them Hemlock disarmed. A couple of magic ones that we were able to disarm. Several that we just triggered because we weren't able to disarm it at all. There was one room, for example, that requested us to make a challenge, to be forthright and challenge whatever the defenders were so that we can move forward. And it just nearly killed Zaldor, who wasn't confident enough in doing the process. And Golly got it even worse. Finally, with the aid of everybody else, we made it through and continued on through the rest of the dungeon until we made it to the very bottom, where Vessel made it very clear to us that there was one final guardian that we had to deal with, the automatons of the furnace, and that their only mission was to make sure that anyone who was not Chaloran should be killed. That turned into a extremely deadly fight. However, we did pull it off. We prepared ourselves for combat, made it out, and packaged ourselves up with enough Vedanites to hopefully find a way to defeat Sher Mordrim. Now, we have our options to go to the other rooms of this exceptionally large Chaloran vault, to find a way back out across the Sea of the Undead, or to find another way that could be leading us into further dragons up in Reskalon or Dakarth, or someplace else that we're not even ready for. So from there, let the adventure begin.